Welcome back. Today we're making this adorable baby seal cake. To make it, we're actually going to start by stacking some 6-inch cake layers. I'm doing this on a pretty thick 10-inch cake drum just because this cake does end up being pretty heavy, but we're going to stack it upwards just like a normal cake. So I'm adding a nice even layer of just regular vanilla buttercream here, and I'm also adding sprinkles between the cake layers just to add a little bit of texture and a nice pop of color. I'm continuing to stack my cake layers. We're going to end up making this cake pretty tall because it has to be long to create the seal's shape, and you're going to see how we're going to transform it in a minute. But before we get to that part, we're going to add a crumb coat around the cake and we're going to chill it until it is firm to the touch. Then we're going to cut off about an inch into the cake to give it a flat side, and that's what we're going to flip this cake over onto. So you want to take your time as you're cutting it and try to get it as straight as possible, and then you want to set that bit that you cut off aside, and we're going to use that later. So now comes the fun part, and it's a little bit scary, but you want to flip the cake over onto that flat side. You also might want to add a little bit more buttercream underneath to make sure that that stays in place. We're then going to add on our 4-inch cake layer that we've trimmed in kind of a domed shape onto the end, and then it's time to trim this cake into the start of the shape of the seal. It kind of looks like a long teardrop, but at this point we're going to properly crumb coat the cake and add a thin layer covering the entire thing. You want to make sure that all of that moisture is locked in, so you cover all the way to the bottom and get in all of those little nooks and crannies. You're going to smooth out your crumb coat using a small offset spatula along with an acetate sheet. An acetate sheet is really just a thin piece of plastic that's flexible, and it's great for curved cakes like this. I crumbled up my bits of cake that we cut off earlier, and I made kind of like a cake ball mixture that I shaped to create the seal's mouth and his little fins. I chilled the cake again, and then I'm covering it now in a gray buttercream that I really just added a little bit of black cocoa to my white buttercream. Then I used a little bit of black and white fondant to make the seal's facial features, and the last step is just to cover the cake board in a bit of graham cracker sand. This step is totally optional, but I really wanted this cake to look like my seal was laying on a beach and living its best life, so a little bit of graham cracker sand just really felt fitting. Since this is part of my animal cake series, I wanted to try to add on a party hat onto the seal cake, but for some reason the angle it sat at, it just didn't look quite right. But that's okay. I was still so happy with how the seal cake turned out. I thought it was just so adorable, and it actually was very hard and very sad to cut into this one. I decided to cut into its back because that seemed somehow like the most humane place, and because we flipped the cake over on its side, the slice came out looking just wild. But it was so fun. So you can see the buttercream is vertical there with the sprinkles, which is just insane. So if you are cutting this, I would recommend actually cutting in the opposite direction, kind of vertically along the back, or I guess parallel to the back, to get a more normal looking slice of cake. I ended up having to cut up the rest of the seal cake, and there really didn't seem like there was really a good way to do it, so I tried to cut it off in small pieces the way you would just with regular slices, but you can see they're just crazy because of the orientation that I cut the cake at. Cutting the poor seal's head was definitely the saddest part, but it had to be done. And you know what, I'm not gonna lie, it was still a very delicious cake, even if it did end up looking pretty sad in the end. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and until next time, happy baking.